Start that. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Marsha to you, who we've had speak on Shivering Beginners and Shivering Steps, and it just wasn't long enough. So we're absolutely delighted to hear more of Marsha's wonderful story this evening. So it's over to you, Marsha. The floor is yours for 45, 50 minutes. Away you go.
All right, all right. Well, I thank everyone for being here. It's always a wonder to be at an AA meeting. I'm grateful to be here sober. I am my my name is Marsha, and I'm an alcoholic. I don't know if I said that. I'm a little scattered, and a little scattered and a little distracted. I'm not in my normal environment. I am with my very, very gravely ill aunt, my mother's sister, and she is the last remaining of my mother's sisters of my mother's generation in the family. And I answered the call to come and care for her. So I left my own home in order to come stay with her, and I've been here for 10 days now. And she's very ill, and uh, that is what is in front of me right now. I started not to go ahead with this talk because I just am not sure what I'm facing hour to hour. But I decided, well, I don't know when this situation will change or how it will change. And so I decided to come do it anyway, because one thing is I always want people to understand is that this program works regardless. This program works whether good times, bad times, happy or sad times. Hold on, hold on. Auntie, don't move. Don't be going nowhere. See, that's what I'm talking about. So I don't want her to fall out of her wheelchair. Um, so I am grateful to be able to be in a position to care for her. And she needs 24-hour care, and she needs very intimate care, if you have an understanding of what that means. And I'm grateful that I can do this and be responsible and have this family look to me for dependability. I can remember years ago, this particular aunt um, has been like the lighthouse for everyone in the extended family. And she's a nurse, she's a registered nurse, and has cared for every single sick person in the family in one form or another, including caring for my own mother for her last 5 years of life. And she was the aunt that when my father and mother would get into these huge fights and battles, that my mother would leave my dad and drag all of us kids over to her house, and she would open her home for us for the summertime until my mother would change her mind and her codependency would kick in, and she would go back to my drunk daddy, and the whole cycle would start all over again. But that aunt opened her home to us. This aunt opened her home to us. Um, I talk a lot about the program and how I live today. I have a very beautiful life. Um, I have a very beautiful home. I am retired from after having worked for 30 years on a job. That was my sober job. And I have a very peaceful, very artful, very aesthetically pleasing home. I live well. But I tell everyone that this program works not merely because of that, but because 15 years ago, I had a house fire in my former home. And I stood all night and watched my home burn. And it was a total loss. And I watched the flames come out through the roof of my home. And I watched the neighbors cry. And I watched the fire department try valiantly to save my historic arts and crafts home to no avail. And I know that this program works because the thought of a drink never even occurred to me while I stood outside and watched that significant change take place in my life. Or the next day when I went to the Red Cross to get blankets and toothbrushes, and I stood in that line with impoverished people to get supplies. The thought to drink never came to me because rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. And I have thoroughly followed this path. And so therefore, the obsession to drink has been removed from me. So I have not had to have a drink no matter what has happened in my life. So I'm going to back up a little bit. Oh, I said that about my fire because when I had that fire, my aunt told me, this aunt that I'm caring for now, just come on over here and bring your dog and come on. And myself and my giant schnauzer, uh, we found a place for him in the garage, and I slept on the couch, and even my son came over with me, and we stayed there for 5 months. She never asked for a dime, and she cared for us throughout all that time until I could get another home. And that's why when she became so ill in last month that I have thought I got to go take care because I have debts to her that can never be repaid. I remember when she was caring for her mother like I'm caring for her. And she had been caring for her for years because she was a very severe Alzheimer's patient. And finally, she decided she was going to take a break. And she and my mother and their other sister decided to go on a trip to Las Vegas. We live in Detroit. I'm from here in Detroit. And they went to Las Vegas and they left me there with my grandmother. And they bequeathed this huge responsibility on me because my aunt had never left her side in years. And they said, can you watch grandmother while we're gone? And I said, yes, I would. Now, this was in my drinking days. And the first day went fine. The second day went fine. The third day, a guy friend who I was liking at the time called me on the phone and said, hey, baby, I'm in town. What you doing? Oh, I'm not doing nothing, just watching my grandmother. Well, why don't I come by for a minute? And I calculated to myself, well, they won't be back until later on tonight. You know, I can just have him come over for a minute. And so he comes over, he has a bottle of scotch, and I'm sitting on the kitchen cabinet with a bottle of scotch with my leg out, toes pointed downward. You know how a lady know how to sit when she with a man she like with that leg out. And I got a drink in my hand, a man on the other, well, drink in one hand, man on the other. And in walks my aunt and my mother and their sister. 6 hours early. I was so mortified at myself for this lapse in judgment, in responsibility. And so I am so grateful that today I don't have to live that way. I don't have I don't have to have alcohol drive every decision and every situation that I'm in and compromise me and put me in compromising positions. So I'm going to back up. I was born in Detroit in 1954, and I am 67 years old. My sobriety date is November the 21st of 1987. So I have been sober for 33 and a half years, give or take some days. And I grew up, I was the, how shall we say this, love child of a Detroit record producer back in the day. He opened up a record store in 1945. And he was a very successful Black businessman, record producer, and he produced blues artists. And he loved the blues, and he produced blues for the people that were still coming to Detroit from the South. And so, I've been in the music world all of my life. And so he also was the first person, he recorded a preacher who was down the street from the record store. And that preacher was the Reverend C.L. Franklin. That preacher, Reverend C.L. Franklin, happened to have a daughter that sang in the choir. And that daughter, her name happened to be Aretha. And so my father was the very first person to ever record the voice of Aretha Franklin. And he made her very first albums, records, which were gospel records. So that's what she sang at the time as a 14-year-old, 14, 15, 16 years old. And so my dad was very successful. This was many years even before Motown and Berry Gordy. He preceded him by about 15 years. My father, when he opened his record store, he saw a young woman standing on the bus stop with her sisters, and that would be my mother. And my father was a grown man, and he saw this teenager waiting on the bus, and he turned and told his son, his son, and said, that girl can sell a whole lot of records, because my mother was a very beautiful woman. And she was beautiful in that kind of Lena Horne school of beauty. And he met her and brought her in as an employee, and she worked there at the record store. But he was smitten by her. And soon that smitten began to, one thing led to another. And he ended up with her. But the problem was he already had a wife and 4 children. And so this kind of situation went on for some years. His first wife wouldn't give him a divorce, because that was the days in which people did not give people divorces. I mean, you had to be granted a divorce. You just couldn't get one, no fault divorce like today. And so while he was in this state of limbo, they had me, he and my mom moved together, and they had me, and then they had my brother. And then she got pregnant with my sister. And I think my aunts put their foot down, and they told my mother, you got to stop this ridiculousness. Because in those days, an out of wedlock child or pregnancy was completely beyond the pale. It was completely scandalous, particularly because my mother had been raised in the sanctified Holy Ghost church. And so this was just beyond the pale. So, but I assure you, I never knew any of this. I did not know of this history of them having not been married. That was just my mom and dad. And I thought they were always married before they met me, but that was not true. And I did not know any of this until my mother passed away at age 79, about 15 years ago. And she took that secret to her grave. And when she died, it was just that scandalous. And when she died, the sisters told me that she had not been married to my dad when I was born, or my brother. And that's a part of my story that I like to tell people when it comes to inventory, because a lot of times there can be situations floating around in your life that you know nothing about, things and secrets in your family that you know nothing about, but deeply influence how people look at you, how people react to you, how they treat you, because now I understood why there were some elder ladies in the family that treated me like I was a ball of sin, because they regarded me that way. And so because of this quote sinful situation in which I had came to the world. So anyway, they were together after a while. And so I grew up in a very middle class, very lush environment with a beautiful home, beautiful environs. I grew up in a tiny town within the city of Detroit called Highland Park. And in that, it was a very lush suburb of Detroit, very green and verdant, um, and just a very middle class lifestyle. But on the weekends, we would go to the record shop. And then we would go to my dad's record shop, and where everything was like popping, it was like, so I went from this middle class, quiet, normal lifestyle to my dad's record shop, was just like partying and all of that going on. And a lot of alcohol, because my dad loved entertaining people in the back of the shop, and people came from all over. A lot of the stars would come by, and record folks would come by, and they'd always have a drink and a shot, and so I grew up looking at alcohol like it was like really, like that's some cool stuff, and so as I was a little girl growing up, he had to move his record store all of a sudden in about 1960. And he had to move it because they were getting ready to run a freeway through that street. And so they began to move that freeway through the street, and they demolished that entire African-American business community. And my father's drinking began to make a shift into alcoholic drinking. And he became increasingly afflicted with alcoholism. Hold on. Lil, go on and sit back down. I don't want you to fall. No, you can't. No, just sit there till I get through. I'll be through. Don't go anywhere. I'll be done. Crises. Okay, so don't get up. Okay, thank you. Don't get up. So needless to say, this is a little taxing. Okay, so my dad's alcoholism was growing. And within some years, by the time I was 10 or so years old, my father's alcoholism was truly, truly at a high pitch. And I therefore grew up in the mayhem of alcoholism, the complete mayhem of insanity. He became increasingly insane. And there were times in which he would get strapped down in a straitjacket. I don't know if people are familiar even today with straitjackets, these white jackets that they would strap you in and cart you off to an insane asylum. And they would take him there because my mother would have had him committed because he had been raging so badly, and they would fight. And, it was just hell growing up like that. And so we went from this bucolic, lush, middle-class lifestyle and this music industry success to, in our home, being in a state of complete confusion and terror at all times. And my dad and mom would fight, and we'd be so afraid, and that they would kill one another. One would kill the other. And so we just grew up like this constantly. And so I began to I always felt different than other kids. I always felt like I was on the outside looking in. Like other kids were on the right foot, right, left, but I was on the left foot. I could never, and I always questioned everything all the time. Like, why did you have to do these things? Why do you do this? Why do you do that? And I had a lot of problems with believing in God. I really believed in God as a child. I was very, very devout child. I wanted to believe in the stories of Jesus and how good Jesus was to everyone and like that. And then I would hear these stories about the Holocaust. And it's like, well, if God is so good, how could there be this Holocaust thing? Or why is it that there was slavery? I began to learn about slavery later. Why was there a thing that's like slavery? Or why did man kill other men? Why? And so I began to question God and in this existence of God. And it wasn't until I came into the program many years later that a sponsor emphasized to me, she said, Marsha, don't be, you don't, it's not that you don't believe in God, because when I came in the program, I was like, I don't even believe in God. I'm an atheist. I'm an agnostic on a good day. And this sponsor would say, don't blame God for man's inhumanity to man. Don't blame God for the things that man does. And that helped me a lot to get to a relationship to a God of my understanding. And I continue to, um, I continue um, to to learn how to drink as a teenager, because I wanted to fit with the cool kids, because I no longer was able to fit with my peer group, my studious spirit peers that were going to school and they were in the orchestra and all of these things that I was doing, but it didn't feel right anymore because the chaos in my home was just too great. I couldn't have company. I couldn't invite my parents to the school. I was often dirty because our home was just in a state of chaos. And I felt so apart from other kids. And I couldn't tell them, I went to school and they said, what did you do yesterday? Well, shoot, we were in the house all night. The police were at our house all night. I can't tell them that. The police were at our house, trying to keep my dad from killing my mom, So I ended up having a very isolated uh, feeling. The big book talks about anxious apartness. And I really experienced that feeling of anxious apartness. And I didn't even want to do things like play sports and all that. I had a deep fearfulness. I was scared I would break something if you threw a ball at me too hard. I just wasn't athletic. I was really just completely bookish. I escaped through books. I was a bookworm. And so that was probably one of the things that saved me, because I was such a reader. And so I continued to try to get along with the cool kids at school, but I wasn't liking them, but I was afraid of them. And so I had to drink in order to be around them, because they were drinking Boone's Farm apple wine, and they was drinking MD 2020. And then they would have one wine, it would say, what's the word? Thunderbird. What's the price? 20 twice. And that is the stuff, the cheap wines and stuff that we would drink back in the day. And it was the days of the music and dancing and house parties and blue lights in the basement and having a good time. So, I was becoming used to this life with alcohol, even though alcohol was tearing up my family. So a lot of times you may have heard, or old heads heard of the saying, somebody joined the circus, ran away and joined the circus. Well, I didn't run away and join the circus. I ran away and I joined the movement. Because back in the day, there was such social upheaval. It is very hard to describe what it was like growing up in the 60s with the kind of social upheaval that existed. It was the women's movement. It was the Black Power movement. It was the anti-war movement. It was the changes in social mores. When I went to school, women could not wear pants. We couldn't wear pants when I went to school. We had to stage protests in order to wear our pants to school. This is how different things have changed, even in my lifetime. And I'm not really what you would call an old woman, just in these last decades, so much has changed. And I was a part of that social tumult. And so I got this inner tumult and I have the social tumult on the outside. And I hook up with the group of Black Power activists that were in the factories in Detroit, and they were shutting down the factories and protesting and all of this stuff. And they became a surrogate family for me. And because I was always attempting to recreate family in all the relationships that I had in my life, trying to recreate a family. And so these people became my family. And my dad, even though he was drunk and he was a mess, he was still a man and he still was a daddy. And he still wasn't feeling it when he found out that I was hanging around with a bunch of old coots in the Black Power movement. He was not feeling that. And I remember when he went over there with his shotgun and said, "What the fuck you doing with my daughter?" But they assured him that they meant me no harm, that they were fighting for rights and all this kind of stuff. Hold on, sorry. Lil, lay down. Don't get up.
I ain't gonna get up.
What are you doing?
I'm moving around.
Don't, please.
I'm tired.
I know, I'm gonna get up when I get through with this, okay? I may have to wrap this up. Okay, so so this is the first time I've ever tried to have her sitting up while I'm doing something. That's why this is so stressful. Okay, so anyway, I lived in this kind of atmosphere, and I had my mayhem in the house. Now I'm with these revolutionaries, that are fighting the power, and we're having demonstrations and we're doing all this kind of stuff. And in the midst of all of it, I end up with a guy, who's older than me, and I don't know how to get away from him. He's basically stalking me. I'm about 15 years old, and I don't know really how to get away from him. He's stalking me, and I'm drinking with these guys, with these older guys, we're sitting around drinking beers, shooting the shit, we're just, doing our thing, and I'm learning how to drink. I've always been a blackout drinker. I've always been a type of drinker that when I started drinking, I couldn't remember what happened the second half of the night. I couldn't, we would go from one party and we'd go to another party and people would say, "Marsha, did you have a good time at the party we went to?" I was like, "What party? What happened?" And it was so unsettling to me that I couldn't remember things. Even when I was 17, 18 years old drinking, I learned to stop asking people what happened last night, because I knew I should know what happened, but I didn't know that was a part of alcoholism. So I went through my late teens like this. I had a baby when I was 17 years old by one of these revolutionaries, and then I dropped out of school, which was sort of my last anchor to sort of normality. But then I ended up, I wanted to support my child. I didn't want to live on the dole, as they say. And I began to work in a plant, which much to the despair of my father, who had, educated me and had me in a school environment that I was supposed to grow up and be a professional. I was not supposed to grow up and work in a factory, but I did because, I'm running my own life and making a sorry job of it, as something in the literature says. But I go to work in the plant gradually. um, as I approach my 20s, I'm still working the plant, and I become a union activist in the plant because I'm always in activism, because that was a very convenient way. That type of activity all the time is a way to not look at self often, but to constantly be looking at society and constantly looking at social things and never looking at self. And so I continued to with my activism. And by the time I was 28 years old, I became president of the labor union in which I belonged. And I was the first Black and the first woman and the youngest person ever elected to the presidency of this union. And this was a big deal. My drinking took a real turn at that point because I was working hard and I was playing even harder. And so I really had a hard time during those years drinking hard and drinking whatever I wanted to drink, because I never had a specific drink. I drank what you had. And I always was kind of jealous of the ladies that could drink like a lady, and they just had their one little drink that they liked. And so anyway, I'm 28. My drinking is spiraling out of control. Um, I by the time I'm 33, I'm really a mess. I'm working all the time, but I'm going into work when I feel like it. And my secretary is saying, don't worry about it. I'll get your calls, don't worry, don't worry. And wait a minute, hold on. I got to do this. I'm going to push you up here. I just can't. I'm going to put you right here, okay?
I can take myself to that.
No, you can't. My apologies. And so I'm having a very difficult time by the time I'm 33 years old. I'm spiraling ever downward. I have 2 children. I'm a single mother, and I'm telling them, just go have a hot dog. Mama will be home from work in a minute, and then I'd come home after happy hour, 11 or 12 o'clock at night, constantly running, constantly working, constantly partying, constantly in the bars, drinking at home, endless cycle. And various men down through the years in difficult relationships and things like this. And so one day I was on the phone. One day I had gone to the bar and partied all night. I shut the bar down, like 2 a.m. And I had fallen asleep and my contacts froze on my eyes. And I woke up in the morning and I was blind. And I couldn't see, and I'm hungover. And I get up and I'm crawling through the floor. And because I can't see, and I'm drunk. And my phone rang. And a young lady who I had met a couple of years before, she said, Marsha, how are you doing? And I said, well, I'm fine. How are you doing? I said, I'm fine. I'm blind and I'm crawling. And she said, how you doing? I said, well, I'm okay. How you doing? She said, well, I joined AA. She said, and if you ever think you need some help, you could join AA too. You could go to this meeting that I go to such and such a place and time. And I was very nicely patronizing to her. And I said, oh, that's so nice. I know AA works for people who need it. Because I was very familiar with the program because I had been for the last several years been trying to go to adult children of alcoholics and Al-Anon because I was dealing with all of these issues from my father's alcoholism. And it's just amazing how my denial was so great that I could sit up there and read all that literature about the 12 steps and all this stuff and never once think that I was an alcoholic, because I would always use my father for comparison. Well, if I got that bad, I knew I was an alcoholic. But, I hung up the phone from this girl. One day, after that, I was having a party all by myself. I had a table full of chemicals of various kinds, a couple of good drinks, and I was just going to have a party by myself. And I was listening to Stevie Wonder, and Stevie Wonder has a record called You Will Know, Troubled Hearts Will Know, Problems Have Solutions, So I Made It So. And his narrative is God talking to a woman that's having problems. And this disc jockey on the radio that I was listening to played it over and over and over again. And all of a sudden, a voice said to me, if Stevie Wonder can believe in God, why can't you believe in God? And it was like a window opened up an inch, a little inch, that my consciousness cracked open enough to think that maybe there was something spiritual that I could look at in my life. I remember going on a trip to New York for a conference. And after the conference, of course, all I wanted to do was drink, and I'm waiting for the party afterward to start. And I decided to go for a walk. And I walked down to this church, which I believed is St. Patrick's Cathedral. And I ended up walking into this mighty, majestic edifice. And I remember sitting down. My life was just asunder. And I knew walking in there that there was something that I was seeking, but it wasn't church. And I walked out, I didn't feel anything, but I knew that I was seeking something. Well, one day I was wanting to go out, and I had a lot of problems in the meantime. I had problems on the job. I had problems with my kids. I had stuff going on. And one day I was wanted to go out on a Monday night. I called my sister and said, "Hey, you want to go out to the club?" And she was like, "Marsha, it's Monday." And I was like, "Well, what's wrong with Monday? You got to wait till Friday to go out?" And she said, "Yeah, most people do." I was like, "Well, screw you." So I hang up from her. I call a girlfriend. "Hey, you want to go out?" No, I don't want to go out on Monday night." "Ah, screw you." So I get all dressed up and I decide I'm going out myself. I get up, I get up, I go, I get in the car, and I'm fishing around in my purse and realize I have no money. And this is the days before ATM machines. You couldn't just go somewhere and get money. So it's evening. I don't have any money, and I'm in the car and I'm driving and I'm fishing around in my car and I'm like in my purse and I'm like, well, what am I gonna do? And so something said, and then my mind said, just go stand at the bar and smile at somebody and a guy will buy you a drink. Now, I assure you that back in those days, I was looking like somebody would buy me a drink if I stood in the bar smiling. I assure you. So I thought about that, and all of a sudden, a voice came to me. And that voice said, "Marsha, you're not standing up at no bar waiting for a dude to buy you a drink. You weren't raised like that, and you're not doing that." And I tell you, that was my bottom. I've done much worse things than that. I broke up a marriage. I had an affair with a man who had a wife that was pregnant when he started entangling with me. It was a situation that reverberated now all the way to these years, 40 years later. That moment was as far as I was going to go, however. And I turned my car around and got on another freeway. And I went to that meeting that girl told me about on the phone. I don't know how I knew it was that night. I don't know how I even remembered where it was. I parked my car. I walked in the meeting, and I got there, and an elder opened the door and he said, "Welcome, to AA." And he said, "You're in the right place." And I walked in, and then I realized that everybody in the meeting was speaking Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish. And I was like, oh my God. And you have to realize I'm all dressed up. I have an ankle length fur coat on. I got earrings down to here. I got hair all the way down to my waist. I'm just Miss Fancy Pantsy, right? And everybody at this meeting looked like they were like, just got out of prison. It was all dudes. And it was like, oh my God. It was a bunch of Mexican dudes. They were all there. It's like, dang. And the elder guy, he told me, he said, "Don't worry, you're in the right place." And it turns out it was a halfway house. And that's why they were all there. And it was a halfway house meeting. And this man translated the entire meeting to me in English. Every reading, every prayer, every share, he translated the entire meeting to me. And from that moment, I never had another drink. And that was 33 and a half years ago. And I have had a love for AA since the very first. Now, I was suspicious of AA. I had a feeling that you people were trying to like secretly turn me into a born again Christian from the back door, like, I'm like, they're saying it's a religious program, but deep inside, they want me to be an evangelist, or, I had a lot of things. I thought AA was a cult, and it was like, I don't like all this cultist behavior and all these kindergarten phrases and all this stuff you got to be saying. Easy does it, one day at a time, first thing first. It's like kindergarten, but I kept coming. And so after I had been sober for a little bit, about a year, people began to tell me there were problems with the finances in my job and my union. And this time I listened. They had been telling me this for a couple of years, but this time I listened and realized that there was some financial improprieties going on. And I called for help. I called for an investigation. And I did right in the nick of time, because there was an investigation made, and the feds came and investigated, and it was a horrific situation. And then eventually they found out that that secretary that was telling me all the time, Marsha, don't worry, you don't have to come in. I'll take care of anything. I'll get your calls. She had been embezzling, and she embezzled to the tune of over $100,000 right up under my nose. And so I had to contend with that. She was fired, and she had to come up with some kind of plea agreement or something like that. I was never accused of any wrongdoing. They had no reason to believe that I myself had engaged in any of this. However, I did have a lack of fiduciary responsibility, as it is called. And so a year later, I had to step down. And a lot of people wanted me to fight for that job, but I made a decision. This was my amends to those people. And I had to get up in front of that entire membership in a membership meeting and tell them why I no longer was going to work for them, and that my drinking had caused this problem. And, but anyway, my aunt is getting restless again. I need to wrap this up. I am grateful to be here. It's been quite a ride. I've been married and divorced in the program. I remarried, and about 3 years ago this month, my husband, I came home from work one day and he was dead. He died in his sleep. He had been sick and no one expected him to be so close to the end, but he died. And I'm telling you that to tell you that I never had a thought of a drink, because the obsession to drink has been removed from me. So thank you very much for letting me share. I have a lot of happy times in sobriety. I'm just sort of in a crucible right now, in this situation that I'm in. So I thank you for your patience with me, because I did not know that. I thought I was going to have someone else with me today. My cousin left. And so I'm here by myself with her, and I didn't think that was going to happen. And I didn't want to cancel. So I thank you all for your patience and tolerance during this kind of difficult talk that I'm giving. I just love being sober. I love being clear, clarity. I'm a writer today. After I had the union job, I had to leave that job. I got another job in the court system, and I just retired there after 30 years. But I also became an artist, and because that was in me. And the program allowed the real me to be chipped out of this block of wood, And so I'm an artist and I'm a writer. And so I do a lot of writing, and I do a lot of speaking, and do a lot of television and film. And I have just amazing life today. And I've had losses, but I've had so many things that I've gained. So thank you for letting me share. And I'm going to see about her for a second, just nudge her back up in the chair. And I'm still here. Thank you.
Thank you, Marsha. Oh, that was absolutely wonderful. And let me just stop